Hey everybody, my name's Austin. I'm a senior product designer at GitLab. This week I'm going to jump into the agenda and start off with a update to our pajamas documentation. We're refining an idea to better clarify how we go about actually using the question mark, the help icon, throughout our GitLab interface. We submitted a small change to begin clarifying that, which is really awesome. This basically just tells you use the outline version and make sure it's blue. Pretty simple start, but that should help make that pattern a little bit more consistent. I also wanted to thank everybody for helping me get this merged. Specifically, thanks to Dennis, who taught me how to get the SVG library to update locally for me and precompile that so that it would actually render so I could get my after screenshot. Super glad to see that finally made it in, and also great work to Jeremy, who designed the logo. I also wanted to do a brief touch on what UX debt is. I was going through and refining some of the issues with my manager, Mike. An issue should be considered UX debt if at the point when we decided to build the feature, we steered away from doing something that wasn't as great for the user experience that we plan to come back to later. A great example of this is that HIPAA logo. When initially we created the HIPAA project template, we were just using the general Tanuki logo. We knew that wasn't a great identifier for the project template itself, so we created UX debt to go back and fix that. An example of something that's not necessarily UX debt would be like discovering that the border of a table isn't the right color gray. That's more technical debt. So I'll continue to keep my eye on what is truly UX debt, but really we need to have just a decision to say, hey, we aren't doing this thing here, but we're going to come back to it so we can refine the user experience later. I also wanted to share that I set up a new folder in Figma specifically dedicated to compliance. So here you'll actually just find all my Figma files. I tend to add a rocket ship next to the ones that are done, and the locks are more for dedicating that it's compliance thing. It's not actually locked down. But I took those out of the bigger manage area because there were just a lot of them in here. And so that should help break things down easier. And if you're looking for stuff, I really do try and stick to either labeling something by its epic or its issue, depending on how it's linked in GitLab. Lastly, I saved the best for last because it's a bit more of a discussion topic. So we had a great meeting with Pedro and Kai talking about the direction we're having for introducing external APIs as an approver within a merge request. Ultimately, I don't see a huge impact towards the feature we already built so far, at least for this release. But I think what we are going to try and hone in on next week is how will that approval gate appear in the merge request. So currently we are proposing to have it show up in the approver section. Instead, I think what is a fair compromise to make this a little more clear on the merge request page itself is putting this alongside the other merge request widgets. Since this isn't necessarily preventing the merge from going in, it's more used as an informational point to inform the approvers of whether or not they should approve. We might get to the point where we actually can make this more restrictive in terms of actually preventing the progression of a merge request. But for now, I'm trying to keep this as minimal of a change as possible, just so we can start exposing this data, because otherwise users are going to have to go outside of GitLab to go verify these things anyways. So this helps us bring it into the workflow a little bit more, even if it's not the perfect home for it. With that said, I am trying to investigate some areas of how we can relocate where the creation of the approval gates happens. So one area I was thinking of was bringing this into the merge checks. You may have noticed I relabeled it status checks. I'm just playing with the language a little bit. Pedro found a really awesome feature in Microsoft's documentation on Azure of how they create these branch policies to do status checks. Essentially, you're looking into a service, looking for a post to tell you if it was successful or not to complete a pull request. So following that pattern just a little bit, thinking about where else this could appear, I think that would be something we should consider in future iterations as we get customer feedback on users trying to use this and hear feedback on how it fits into their workflow today, slash like what their expectations are. And so maybe pulling it up underneath where like the merge checks area is, trying to reuse a lot of the UI from the approver section could be useful. Was also maybe toying with the idea of adding it to the form of when you create a protected branch. So this would be neat to be able to tie these things together. So maybe instead of having under merge checks, maybe we introduce this under a protected branch. So I think the only thing tricky here is we want to make sure we can add multiple checks for a specific branch. It's not just going to be one check normally. I'm sure it'll be more than one. And I also want to talk to Annabelle about thinking about how the policies builder is going to work. She has like a vision for how it's going to play out for a number of different other types of policies, but what if we also could create a policy for status checks? And perhaps that status check policy could be a similar form. I added in some more ideas here from kind of from like Microsoft's idea, but being able to say we want this to fail a merge request. We want this to change whenever there are new, with a status update when there's new change. Just should give some more control over the policy itself. But then I was trying to think, okay, so do we define the policy which branch it associates to? Or do we define the policy at like the group level and then give the ability to pick a policy within a protected branch? Not really sure. I'm going to continue talking to some of the other designers and kind of see what they think. So that'll be like Mike Nichols and Pedro and Annabelle to kind of figure out where can we find a great home for this like approval gate feature, because it is valuable in the end. But figuring out where it belongs might take a little more time. So thanks for hanging with me. Excited to see and talk to you all next week.